Okay,
Okay.
sorry about that.
Oh, no, we're good. We're the only ones here at the moment.
Okay,
Actually, it was Isaiah 42 today.
what did I say, 52?
Yeah. Same principle applies.
Well, 42 definitely puts it in second Isaiah, not third.
Correct.
52, it might have been third. Where?
Here's Helen.
Oh, 45 minutes.
Hi, Helen.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm awake this week.
Well, Lee posted the last one yesterday, so you can see that.
Yeah, I went looking for it, I don't know, over the weekend and it wasn't up yet, so
I
I'll
was
have
up, I think it was up yesterday afternoon.
yeah. Well, I was at church yesterday afternoon for the community meal.
Oh.
I was a little
Yes,
busy.
certainly were. You certainly were. Wasn't that a interesting group of people?
Oh, Ray and Penny.
What do you mean? That came for lunch?
Well, that stayed for coffee hour, that
Oh,
dyed Easter eggs, that
yeah,
did the lunch. I mean, it was just interesting.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, there were some of those kids that are just expert egg dryers.
Oh, there he is. There he is.
They were
Well, you
doing
did
a
a-
marvelous
Yeah.
job.
You did a very nice job on it.
There's the hello dog.
She had to say hello. She just got out of the, well, a couple of hours ago, out the bathtub.
That's the boss.
Oh.
Huh?
Yeah, which required cleaning the bathroom up after we were done.
That was the boss.
Yeah, the boss.
Good fun.
How you doing, David?
Good, good. Hey, I talked to Mike and Karen Wusthoff a week ago. We're going to try and come down for the week of the tag sale.
Oh, good.
We'll help out with that.
Remarkable season, and it's
Actually, they've gotten the marionettes out for Good Friday.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I saw that. Is he doing it? Because we had special tables they usually set up for that.
Oh yeah, they're using all the same stuff.
Okay. It was all in the shed. You got to dig it out of the shed.
Well, Mike spent quite a little bit of time cleaning it all up and fixing them all up because they haven't been used. And I asked my daughter the last time she remembered them being used, and she thinks she was in high school and she's 36.
A few years back, there's a while back they did use them, I thought.
They use it.
Back.
It's more recent than that.
Oh, is it only
How about
5 years? 5 years?
Yeah, but it's been a few years. It's been before the pandemic,
it
obviously.
was about 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, it was when Lily Kuhn was in confirmation at the time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, Emily graduated in 2008.
oh, okay. Oh, okay. I was thinking she was before that.
No.
That's true.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, how are you?
Good. You got new glasses?
Yes,
You like them?
I do.
Okay, they look nice.
Emily says they look like butterflies.
Okay.
Take that as a compliment from a young person.
Yeah, she's 5. What does she know?
Butterflies, apparently.
Okay. So,
Did he finally get rid of the snow?
Yeah. We don't have any snow right now. It's going to be warm next couple of days. It's kind of cold last week though. Up and down, 40 to 60.
Yeah, well, that's same here.
Yeah.
We're gonna go up to start the garden this morning, and since it was
39.
39, we said, no,
Oh,
not yet.
you took the soil.
Yeah, we're trying to get the water system, the drip
Oh,
hoses
oh,
out.
yeah, you
And
can still have a freeze.
Not warm, they don't uncoil, they stay
Oh.
coiled up.
Yeah,
And if
They'll
you have to
crack.
fight with them, they crack and all of that. So it's got to be at least 50
you need to stick them in the sun on a
Yeah.
sunny.
if there is any. Yeah.
We'll get
So-
3 days of semi-sun. so.
We,
Yeah.
we made a overnight visit to your town, David.
You did overnight? Would you fly up?
No, we drove up and then drove back on the next day because our granddaughter her belly dancing troupe was doing a show. So it's important to her, so we went.
Okay, was that at the college or?
Yeah, at U of R.
Okay,
Yeah, she's done it every year she's been there, except for COVID.
okay.
Amazing thing is she managed to talk her boyfriend into doing it too.
Ah, that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he gets the prize for being a good sport.
Did he make him wear a tutu or something?
Well, they don't wear that. They wear,
No. They wear something different.
yeah. So,
A
Like I
lot
said,
of clinky jewelry.
yep,
Yeah.
jewelry and fake tattoos.
That had to be a long drive then, up and back in 2 days.
It's
Yeah.
not fake tattoos, it's henna.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, that's right. It's henna. You're right. On the hands, right? People at work used to do that. Henna. Yeah, they're temporary tattoos.
Yes.
So did you stop to get your car charged on the way or back, or what? How'd that work? out?
well, we use the plug-in. So when you drive that distance, you're just, it's hybrid.
So how far do you go on the electric? Only 50 miles on the?
On my car, you can do about 20 miles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
now in Mary's car, you can do 200 because that's a straight electric.
Yeah, that's all electric. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what I confused your two cars last time, I think, because I was looking at the hybrids and most of them only go about 20 to 50 miles.
Yeah,
The hybrid. You got to go
But-
electric to go for longer.
but unless we have a trip like that, I mean, the 20 miles is enough. It's enough to get me back and forth to Norwich.
Yeah, yeah. I wish I had that when I was working, 5 or 6 years ago, because that's what I
Yeah.
needed I was mostly highway, 90% highway to work.
Yeah. And also, they have chargers where you used to work.
Yeah, they did that a couple years. They did about a year before the COVID,
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago.
Okay. So I think everybody's with us. So today we are moving in to the literary prophets. Keep in mind, and Professor Cohen will emphasize it, repeat this, but so there's two kinds of prophets. Last couple of weeks, we talked about what are called the non-literary, meaning they're prophets who don't have a book. Elijah and Elisha are the significant names there. Today, we're going to start with the literary prophets, and sort of the big guns are Isaiah and Jeremiah. Then there's other minor prophets, minor just meaning that they don't have very long books. It has nothing to do with their importance. I think we discussed once that every day has a reading, and so the reading, and this is actually sort of relevant to what we're going to do here. So today's reading, which is the Monday of Holy Week, is from Isaiah 42, chapters 1 through 7. And so the thing to keep in mind now is that, and it'll be discussed, is that at least most scholars believe that Isaiah probably had multiple authors. There's most people at least believe there's 2, possibly 3. 42 falls in what's called Second Isaiah, which is dated from about the end of the Babylonian exile, and that's about 547-ish, I think.
Oh, okay.
Remember right? Thank you. And keep in mind that then Isaiah, the first Isaiah is pre-exilic. So, and so the 42 is, it reads as follows, and if you've got your Jewish Study Bible, it's page 867. But This is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall teach the true way to the nations. He shall not cry out or shout aloud or make his voice heard in the streets. He shall not break even a bruised reed or snuff out even a dim wick. He shall bring forth the true way. He shall not grow dim or be bruised, till he has established the true way on earth, and the coastland shall await his teaching. Thus said God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what it brings forth, who gave breath to the people upon it and life to those who walk thereon. I, the Lord, in my grace have summoned you, and I have grasped you by the hand. I created you and I appointed you, a covenant people, a light of nations, opening eyes deprived of light, rescuing prisoners from confinement, from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. So some of that, if not the exact words, some of the themes I think you probably are quite familiar. So this is the first of what some people call the servant songs in Isaiah. And these have been the subject of multiple interpretations. So among Christians, I don't think I'm giving it that these really are considered to be predictions or prophecies of Christ, especially when you get into some of the other ones that talk about the suffering the servant endures. That's not a interpretation that traditional Jews use. There's several interpretations. One common interpretation is that the servant is actually the nation of Israel. And I think you might see that toward the end where it talked about I've created a covenant people, a light to the nations. So so keep in mind that so this is one of those texts which and we'll talk more about this in the second part of the course where we talk about the different Christian and Jewish interpretations of these texts. But this is one of those texts that's subject to different interpretations depending on your tradition. So that's Isaiah. And the other thing I wanted to show you, just in case, let's see, I'll share the screen quick here. And so everybody see that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
That is the scroll of Isaiah, the whole deal, with a few little pieces missing. So that was the scroll found at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's, as I said, the 42 is probably down here somewhere, but unless you can read Hebrew, it's. So anyways, that's what they look like now. I remember when I talk about minor prophets, the minor prophets were such that they talk of like there's, they could fit multiple prophets on one of these long scrolls. So that's why they call them the minor prophets. That's all. So, but this is the scroll of Isaiah, which probably is the oldest. This is the oldest existing copy that we know of. It was probably done by a community called the Essenes near the Dead Sea. So, such are things that biblical scholars worry about. So today we will begin with the literary prophets. And actually, I haven't seen Carol join us. And I haven't got any messages. Anybody heard from her?
Not today.
Okay.
On Sunday, she didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. By the way, Lee did post last week's lecture yesterday afternoon.
Thank you.
So it's up there. Bear with me. I think I may try to call Carol just to make sure she's not trying to get in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that didn't work. Let's try. Okay. Well, maybe they're trying to botch on a ball game. So, I guess without further ado, we'll share the screen. I did offer to Lee, by the way, for those of you that, well, the St. Luke people probably know this. Lee has resigned being communications person, but he said he'll keep doing it until somebody replaces him. But I did offer that if he wants me to teach me the dark magic on how to upload these things, you know, I can do that. So let's share this.
Yeah. Travis might have tips on that too, right?
Okay, everybody's muted. Sharing the sound. Here's the screen. Okay.
We mentioned the figures of Elijah and Elisha last time as figures active in the 800s BCE. They're both revolving around the figure of Ahab, king of Israel. These were pre-literary prophets. They are both famous figures, Elijah and Elisha. They both do a whole range of things, but we don't have a book of Elijah. We don't have a book of Elisha. In that sense, they're non-literary. They have not left behind a book. We're speaking about today, and Monday would be literary prophets. So here, just to remind you where we are, there is the Canon list up on the screen. So the middle section in the Jewish division of the Bible is Nevi'im, the books of the prophets. The first half of the Nevi'im section is the Deuteronomic history, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And the second half are the actual books of the prophets. And we have the three main literary prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, more or less chronological order. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Then we have a single collection of 12 prophets, who simply referred to as the 12, because they're relatively short and they all fit on a single scroll. So all 12 wind up becoming neighbors on that scroll. So that's what we're talking about today. And Monday, these are literary prophets, all right? The prophets who have a collection of oracles or words attributed to them in writing, in books. We don't have time to pursue all of this, of course. So we're taking most of my examples from Hosea and Amos, who are the first prophets in the collection of the 12, who we think are the earliest literary prophets, Hosea and Amos, both active in the north. I'll come back to chronology in a moment. And then Isaiah. Most of my examples will be drawn from these books, with a bunch from Jeremiah and only very few from Ezekiel. Okay, that's where we are, just to remind ourselves of that. We'll discuss chronology in a moment. Okay, if you have a Christian Bible, the prophets are also a section in the Christian Bible, but their overall arrangement is a little bit different, but the books cluster together as prophetic books there too. They come at the end in the Christian Bible. So the Hebrew word for prophet is navi, plural is niviim. The etymology of this word is unclear. This is for last I checked. It still is unclear, isn't it? Nobody knows exactly where this word comes from, what its literal meaning is. But it refers to a human being who serves as an intermediary between God and society. An intermediary in two senses. All the literary prophets are men. He brings the word of God to people, or he brings the needs of the people back to God, right? He's an intermediary. Classically, he's bringing the word of God to the people, but the other function is not to be omitted. What does this mean that the prophet brings the word of God to people? This is something that we have trouble grasping or try to understand how the ancient Israelites understood this. And different passages portray this function in different ways. Something like ecstatic possession. You recall the story of Saul among the prophets who was rolling around in the dirt in some kind of possessed state. That's what a prophet does. Or perhaps he falls into a trance, the way Balaam describes it. Or perhaps we should imagine dreams, that the prophet receives dreams that you and I don't have, and whereas the prophet gets these dreams. In any case, we moderns are convinced that this is a paranormal state. The prophet experiences something that you and I don't experience, that normal people don't experience. And here's the key point. Society validates it. Our society, we would not validate it. In our society, if someone comes around and says, "Thus spake the Lord," or "The Lord came to me in a vision," or "I heard voices," or "I've seen something," we would say to him, "You need help." Right? Go to the therapist down the block, go to the shrink, go to the clinic during hours, and talk this through. Right? Clearly something is wrong. However, in that society, validates that kind of experience. And that raises the very interesting question of how the society knows if the prophet is a true prophet or a false prophet. How does society know whether the experiences of the prophet indeed make him a man of God, a holy man, a man bringing the word of the Lord to the people, or maybe he's wrong. Maybe at best he's just plain crazy. Maybe at worst he's evil and is lying. How do we know? That's a fascinating question, which is addressed in several biblical passages here and there, but nowhere does the Bible step out and try to give us hard and fast criteria, or the one place where it does is Deuteronomy 18, but I think there, I don't have time to deal with that passage right now. There, Deuteronomy says, if he predicts something that comes true, he's a true prophet. If it doesn't come true, he's a false prophet. Well, think about that for more than 10 seconds and you realize that's a stupid criterion, and that simply is not going to work, because prophets, as we'll discuss in one moment, prophets are not predictors of the future. That is to reduce a prophet to a mantic seer, to a weatherman. Tomorrow it will rain. That's not the function of the prophet, to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. The function of the prophet is something very different, as we'll discuss. So back to that interesting question. Society somewhat validates this paranormal possession or ecstatic possession of the prophet, and society is somehow, perhaps only in retrospect, do we figure out who is or was the true prophet. A classic example of that problem is Jeremiah, when Jeremiah is yelling at other prophets, and he says, if you don't listen to my advice, Babylon will conquer, Jerusalem will fall. But there are other prophets who are saying, everything's fine, don't worry, don't listen to him. And Jeremiah says, don't listen to them. And they say, don't listen to him. And he says, they're false prophets. No, he's a false prophet. So what's an Israelite to do? Well, you wait around and you realize in retrospect, gee, I guess Jeremiah was right. Jerusalem fell. That's not too helpful. Okay, that's a fascinating subject. Social function of the prophet. How does the prophet fit into society? There are close connections between the prophet and kingship. This we've already seen, right? The emergence of these pre-literary prophets accompanies the emergence of kingship, right? So David has on his payroll, the official authorized prophet of the monarchy. Doesn't mean he's a toady. On the contrary, the royal prophet can come to the king and say, you have sinned. You have done wrong, and you will pay. So even the court prophet can turn on the king and give him the word of the Lord. And this seems to be the general pattern. The general pattern is, whether he's royal or not, on the official payroll or not, prophets typically are opposition figures. They're opposed to the king, they're opposed to the high priest, They're opposed to society. They're opposed to the institutions of society. They typically are outsiders. They typically are non-establishment figures. They're anti-establishment figures, even if they're paradoxically are royal prophets, as the early ones were. Some of the prophets are holy men, seers, miracle workers. These we've already seen. The pre-literary prophets, Elijah and Elisha, are precisely these. The literary prophets, as a rule, are not. In other words, do they do miracles? Do they resurrect dead children? Do they multiply loaves and fishes? No. Typically not. There are exceptions, but typically not. They are holy men in the sense that people don't kill them. They want to kill them. The king wants to shut this guy up. How are we going to get this guy to shut up? Well, sire, we could send the secret police and, he could meet with an accident. But you can't do that because he's a holy man. You can throw him in prison, which is what happens to Jeremiah. You can threaten him endlessly, which happens to Jeremiah. But at the end of the day, you don't kill him because he's a holy man. And society recognizes this, that you can't do that. But nonetheless, the literary prophets don't serve as, for the most part, as miracle workers. Why do I keep saying literary prophets don't foretell the future? Because the goal of the prophet, most of them talk about gloom and doom all the time. Well, there are exceptions, and there is another pattern as well, but they're famous for gloom and doom. The gloom and doom of the prophet is, the function of that gloom and doom is to warn you. There's always an implied unless in what the prophet says. These terrible things will happen unless you repent, unless you do better, unless you turn back from your evil ways, unless you turn to the Lord. Sometimes it's stated explicitly, other times it is implied or it's implicit. So that's not predicting the future. That makes the prophet a warning figure. So someone else coined this. I didn't, but I don't remember where I found it. Prophets are not foretellers. They are forthtellers. They're not foretelling the future. They are forthtellers. They are speaking forth. They say, warning. I'm sounding the warning. Like the proverbial canary in the mine, right? Bad things are going to happen unless you do something. That's the function of the prophet in society. So that makes the prophet, an oppositional figure. No dynastic succession among prophets. Prophets are lonely men. They are loners. This is not like Saul and the Bnei HaNevi'im, the guilds of prophets of old. The literary prophets are all loners. Oh, they have followers. Jeremiah has followers, those who excoriate them as well as those who follow them around. And that's how we imagine the prophetic books emerge, that their disciples, as we'll see in a second, the disciples presumably remember, collect, write down, preserve the words of the prophet. So in that sense, he's not a loner. But otherwise, he's in a loner, socially speaking, right? He's on the outs because he's criticizing everybody. He's threatening death and doom. Do you want a friend like that? Who's constantly talking about gloom and doom, right? The end of days, in a bad sense. The Babylonians are coming. Society is corrupt, evil, wicked. Is that what you want to listen to all day? No. Hence, prophets don't have many friends, right? As I said, they are kind of loner figures. And part of that is that there's no dynastic succession. It doesn't have a social niche in the sense of a defined role. It's oppositional. Some are priests. Even though the prophets criticize the temple and the temple cult in various ways, as we shall see, some of them are said to be priests, notably Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Okay, to summarize all this, the figure of the literary prophet as it emerges in ancient Israel has no precise analog in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, you can find holy men, sure. Magic men, sure. Charismatic miracle workers, sure. People who write interesting poetry about the gods, sure. But this mysterious combination of things that we find in ancient Israel, the prophet as social gadfly, a social critic, and doing so, by the way, in some very elevated poetry, this is something which is not precisely paralleled elsewhere. And indeed, the first literary prophets, Hosea and Amos, it's like the mystery of Shakespeare. Where does this come from? Where was this guy? How do all of a sudden this guy opens his mouth and starts talking, and we've never heard Hebrew like this before? We've never heard poetry like this before. How do we understand it? The answer is we don't. There's something hidden from us. There are schools that taught people to write this way. Is there a prehistory to this? We don't really know. But Hosea and Amos burst on the scene in the middle of the 8th century BCE, and you already are starting with people writing poetry of very elevated diction, sometimes quite extraordinarily beautiful, and often is not extraordinarily challenging to the reader. Some chapters in Hosea especially, whoo-hoo, right, they are tough. So where does this come from? We don't know, but they burst forth on the scene. We have prophetic books. That's what makes them literary prophets. We have the book of Hosea, the book of Amos, the book of Jeremiah, etc. How do we imagine how these books came to be? Well, it's possible the prophet himself is collecting his own words the way a poet might, or an author might. And indeed, Jeremiah is our best example of that, where there are a whole bunch of passages in Jeremiah where he talks about the scroll, the book of his, he's still alive, and his prophecies are already being collected in a book, and apparently he himself is involved with that, and he has an amanuensis, his satrapanza, to help him, a scribe named Baruch. So we are to imagine the prophet himself, perhaps, or his close disciples, begin to collect his writings, perhaps in his lifetime already, as in the case of Jeremiah. And then, after he's gone, editors come by and assemble these bits and pieces of prophetic sayings, prophetic speech, and they assemble it into a book. They add biographical data if they have it. A good example is that wonderful little story in Amos, where Amos confronts Amaziah, the priest of Bethel. And Amos says to Amaziah, the priest, "You are doomed." And Amaziah says, "Oh, Amos, just go away." That's a loose paraphrase of what's going on in that story. Again, Amaziah can't kill him because he's a holy man. But Amaziah can tell him, "Oh, shut up and just get out of here." And then Amos turns around and says, "You will be killed, and your wife will be made a harlot, and Bethel will be destroyed." And he walks out. Very dramatic. Right. So you have biographical anecdotes such as this, which are also picked up from somewhere or other. The editors add superscriptions, the words of Jeremiah, the vision of Isaiah. They add these little editorial headings and so on, and they create a book. Now, why do I discuss this? Because this immediately raises the question of the integrity of these books. Did Jeremiah write the book of Jeremiah? Did Isaiah write the book of Isaiah? The short answer, I think, has to be the book as we have it was collected by editors, disciples, out of all kinds of sources of information. We don't have access to those sources anymore. They did. You don't have to be a great scholar to notice that Hosea chapter 3 is in the first person, and Hosea chapter 1 is in the third person, where the prophet talks about himself. So I guess the prophet one day spoke in the first person, one day spoke in the third person. These prophecies are remembered, and somehow mysteriously they get juxtaposed and put into the book. In other words, the prophetic books are very complicated things. We should not imagine that Jeremiah sat down and wrote the book of Jeremiah. We should imagine that Jeremiah, over the course of a long life, gave many prophetic utterances. many, I don't know about all, of which get remembered, they get edited, they get redacted, they get put into a book. And the people who made the book of Jeremiah got their information from wherever they could find it. And the result is, the book of Jeremiah is a very good example. It seems to be occasionally a chaotic assembly of material, where we're jumping around from different kinds of material, from the point of view of genre, different kinds of material, and it's not always clear where we are in the construction of the book of Jeremiah. And the evidence for that is that the Greek version of the book of Jeremiah in the Septuagint is arranged differently from our Hebrew book of Jeremiah, because apparently there were different editions of the book floating around. In other words, class, why am I banging my head against the wall on this problem? The problem here is you have the same problem as always. You think with Jeremiah or the prophetic books, you actually have access to the verb ipsissima verba, the very words of an individual named author. That's what you think. That's what you want. But it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. It's complicated. It's messy as we try to imagine how the prophetic book came to be. According to modern Bible scholars, every single one of our prophetic books, the big ones, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the little ones, Hosea, Amos, etc., Obadiah, one chapter, right? All of them have a share of interpolations, additions, rearrangement of material, additions of glosses, or maybe comments on the text. There's not a single one of the prophetic books that actually is a single, smooth, organic, whole composition that someone sat down and wrote from one end to the other. Hosea, Amos, these are short books, and still modern Bible scholars argue you can see layers in the book, later additions in the book. Certainly, as we'll see when we get to the book of Isaiah, the book of Jeremiah, we're 99.9% sure there's lots of stuff in that book that Isaiah never said, that Jeremiah never said. These were added by disciples and so on. All right, that's not our problem here, but due diligence makes me bring this problem to your attention. Does that mean, therefore, the whole thing is fake? No. I think behind the book of Isaiah is Isaiah. Behind the book of Jeremiah is Jeremiah. And the evidence for that is that Isaiah and Jeremiah don't sound the same. Hosea and Amos don't sound the same. Presumably there is an author, capital A, behind Amos, with Amos's peculiar interests. As we'll see, Amos is interested in the ills of social injustice. Hosea is not. Just isn't. Hosea says nothing about it, whereas Amos has at least one whole chapter and various scattered references to it in his book. It's one whole chapter in a very short book. So how do you explain that? How do you explain that Ezekiel and Isaiah both have visions of God sitting on his throne, but they're not the same? They're different. Surely, the way to understand that is to say there is a real prophet here, and different people have different interests, different perceptions, different, spiritual states in which they see and hear different things, and they write down things differently. So I'm willing to say there is an Isaiah in the book of Isaiah. There is a Jeremiah, there is an Amos, there is a Hosea, and these are different one from the other. But at the end of the day, I still can't be sure on any given line exactly where I stand. Is this from the real Amos, the real Hosea? As often as not, we can't be sure. Okay, I give you on your handout a nice little passage from the Talmud, where the Talmud notices that Ezekiel 1 and Isaiah 6 seem to be parallel one to the other. Each of them has the vision of angels surrounding the throne. The Talmud observes that they're very different, and the Talmud suggests, well, Isaiah sees God visions all the time, so he's sort of blasé about it, whereas Ezekiel gets carried away like a small villager right? And the king comes to town. It's a rare event, and he's completely agog at what he sees. Where Isaiah lives in the city and sees the king all the time. So he's much more blasé about the whole thing. That's how the Talmud explains it, which is, again, trying to get at this problem. An awareness that the prophet contributes to the prophetic message. Footnote, I'm not discussing here the theological problem of how come God, and the same one God, inspires all these prophets, and the prophets all sound different one from another. That's a different problem. Kugel spends some pages on that problem, which I don't quite understand why this bothers him so. But we're understood. The prophet, even if one is a traditionalist, the prophet is not understood as a telephone wire. Remember telephone wires, right? It used to be a telephone wire, right? As a telephone wire for the divine message, right? It's understood the prophet shapes, contributes to the oracle which he delivers. So Isaiah sounds different from Ezekiel. I'm spinning that in a different direction, that arguing that means, therefore, there probably is an Isaiah behind the book of Isaiah, different from the Ezekiel who stands behind the book of Ezekiel. Okay, so we have now prophetic books, right, with prophetic authors. Reminder class. The historical narratives of the Deuteronomic narratives, the Deuteronomistic history. Is that attributed to a named author? No, that's completely anonymous. It's only Moses later on gets the credit for the book of Deuteronomy and then the whole Torah. But the narratives of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings are completely anonymous. The prophetic material is different because it is attributed to named people. Right? Editors come along and tell you the vision of Isaiah, right? So that's why I'm focusing on this authorship problem. Three main chronological periods of the literary prophets. So, number one, the period of Assyrian domination. You remember the evil Assyrians, the big bad bullies, right, of the Near East, primarily 9th century, 8th century BC, early 7th century. This was the heyday of the Assyrian Empire. We spoke about this already. So a key date to remember, 721 BCE, fall of the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Ephraim, fall to the Assyrians. This is the beginning of literary prophecy. Amos and Hosea are two earliest literary prophets. Their books are short, so they're in the collection called the 12. Just a reminder of that. Active in the northern kingdom during the reign of Jeroboam II, which we might say was the last gasp of happiness, the good old days in the northern kingdom, the longest reign of all the kings in the northern kingdom, and a prosperous time. It is during that time of prosperity that we have the emergence of the social critic Amos, who warns the society is evil and is doomed. Turns out he was right. That's Amos and Hosea, middle of the 8th century BCE. Still in the Assyrian time, the end of the 8th century BCE, so the northern kingdom has already fallen, is Isaiah of Jerusalem. Sometimes called First Isaiah, sometimes just called Isaiah, right? The author of the main figure, the hero, the protagonist of the first chapter, the first 39 chapters of the book of Isaiah. I'll come back to that in a moment. That's the Assyrian period, Roman numeral 1, okay? 8th century BCE. Roman numeral 2, the next period of prophecy, the period of Babylonian domination. Remember, the Babylonians succeed the Assyrians. Babylonians, right, contribute to the downfall of Assyria. Ashur, the city of Ashur in 612 BCE. Babylonian Empire succeeds the Assyrian Empire. Key date, 587 BCE, destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Babylonians. So here in the period of Babylonian ascendancy, we have Jeremiah and Ezekiel, both of whom are living during the exile and destruction of the temple. Ezekiel is a complicated case. It looks like he started off in Israel but wound up in Babylon, whereas Jeremiah is around in Jerusalem in 587 BCE, in the years before, the years after. So really at the downfall. So the period of Roman numeral 2, another high point of Israelite prophecy, 8th century, end of the 7th, early 6th century BC, Babylonian period. Then Roman numeral 3, Persian domination. Remember, the Persians succeed the Babylonians. Okay, I'll give you the time chart in 1 second to remind you of all this, right? Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, right? Succession of the three. So the Persian domination, which begins in the mid-6th century BCE, key dates, 539, Persia conquers Babylon, 516, dedication of the Second Temple. These should be review, I hope. We have the figure of second Isaiah or 3rd Isaiah. In other words, Isaiah 40 through 66. And I'll talk about that in 1 second. Okay, does this look familiar to you? Right? So everybody remembers we have the Assyrian period, 8th century BCE, 721, fall of the northern kingdom. That's Roman. That's the first period of prophecy. Second period was the Babylonian domination, Babylonian period, the time of the destruction of the temple, end of the 7th, early 6th century BCE, right? And then the third period of prophetic flowering is in the Persian period, beginning at the end of the 6th century or middle end of 6th century BC, spilling over into the early 5th. Okay, is chronology secure? So did Amos and Hosea walk the streets of Jerusalem and bump into Isaiah? No. Right? Could Ezekiel and Jeremiah have spoken to each other? Maybe. It's a more closer shot, but it seems that the chronology is off there too. Okay? Did Isaiah ever talk and meet Jeremiah? No. Let's pick the book of Isaiah for a second. If you are a traditionalist, then you believe that Isaiah, wrote the book of Isaiah. Footnotes, see earlier caveats in my discussion. But if you are a traditionalist, you believe Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah, from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 66. Actually, you don't really believe that because you observe that there's a whole section there in the end, in the 30s, which parallels the book of Kings. So it looks like someone took some narrative in Kings because it talks about Isaiah, and I don't know which one stuck it from where, either from here to there or there to here. So even a traditionalist would notice this, and a traditionalist might notice some other inconsistencies every now and then as well. But okay, fine, never mind. If you're a traditionalist, Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah. Why then do modern Bible scholars not say that Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah? How do modern Bible scholars know that there is something called second Isaiah, which is our way of saying this is the anonymous prophet who is the author of the prophetic oracles in the book of Isaiah, chapter 40 and onward? Does the book tell you that this begins here, a new author? No. So how do we know? This is a good example. Let's stop for a second and talk about how modern Bible scholars work. Because here I think the case is, to be honest, very convincing. I think a traditionalist is going to have trouble here. But okay, let's just see what we have. So first Isaiah chapters 1 through chapter 39. It's very clear from these chapters that Isaiah is living during the Assyrian period, 8th century BCE. It's very clear that this Isaiah is in contact with the monarchy, notably Hezekiah. I spoke about that very briefly last time. Hezekiah trying to resist the Assyrian juggernaut. He is living in the kingdom of Judah, in Jerusalem. All that is very clear from the biographical details that emerge from Isaiah chapter 1 through chapter 39. Then all of a sudden, chapter 40, there are no more Assyrians. There's no more kingdom of Judah. There's no more Hezekiah. There's no more Babylon. What do we have instead? We have a reference to Cyrus, king of Persia. 2 explicit references to Cyrus, king of Persia, conqueror of Babylon, who is mentioned by name. There are no Assyrians. There are no Judeans. Instead, the prophet talks about the restoration of the temple, the restoration of Judah. What restoration? I thought you a minute ago you were in Jerusalem, everything was fine. No, these chapters, something is presuming a very different social setting. We understand why these chapters are attached to the first part of the book of Isaiah, because thematically, literarily, we understand how second Isaiah, this anonymous prophet, carries forward many of the ideas, many of the rhetorical turns of phrase of the author of the first book of Isaiah. But at the end of the day, does that make this prophet the same as the first one? If you're a modern Bible scholar, the answer is, of course not. The social situation is completely different. So somebody took the words of an anonymous prophet, whom we call second Isaiah, chapter 40 and onward, picked them up, arranged them, collected them in the usual way, and then plunked them at the end of the book of Isaiah. Were they trying to deceive you, you innocent reader, as you read, so that you should think that this all goes back to the 8th century BCE? Is there an attempt here for deception, or a very innocent act? I simply plunked them down at the end of the biblical book, and on the syllabus I give you a bunch of other examples where end of biblical books seem to collect anonymous material. You stick it on at the end. And he wasn't deceiving you because he just stuck it someplace where it belongs. Thematically, literarily, we could see there are lots of connections. So he put it on at the end. Is he trying to deceive you or not? This question I can't answer because I don't know. In any case, I'm not implying or suggesting necessarily that there is any deception involved. But later readers, Jewish and Christian alike, when they read it, they thought it was all one book. But we modern Bible scholars know better. Now, I believe this is a very convincing case. The case that there are two Isaiahs. Footnote, according to modern Bible scholars, maybe there were three Isaiahs because there's something called third Isaiah, because we imagine that the social setting of Isaiah beginning with chapter 57 is not the same as chapter 140 through 56. But okay, it doesn't matter. I'm not worried about that right now. Okay. So that's why we have second Isaiah in the Persian period and first Isaiah in the Assyrian period. Yes, Rebecca. Excellent question. Do later prophets have intertextual relationship with the earlier prophets? They do. As far as I remember, they never cite them by name. No, somebody's quoting Micha Hamarashti. Now, where is that? They don't quote literary prophets by name. They do quote prophecies, or there are numerous intertextual allusions. So a good example would be second Isaiah, which has intertextual allusions to first Isaiah all the time. There is no question there are intertextual allusions, right? Any biblical commentary the JSB notes will show you that. But they don't actually have actual citations. Excellent question. How do traditionalists respond? Ultimately, the traditionalists would have to say either you believe in prophecy or you don't. So traditionalists would have to say, it's a little awkward, I admit, but Isaiah, living in the Assyrian period in the 8th century BCE, is talking about events of the Persian period in the 6th century BCE. But if you believe in prophecy, that's not impossible. My response would be to say, yes, of course, that's true. Nothing's impossible. However, why would anybody have remembered or understood these prophecies in the 8th century BCE? They won't know what he's talking about. Right, the prophecies only make sense and are memorable in the 6th century BC. However, if you are a traditionalist, then you have to say, I believe in prophecy, so Isaiah of Jerusalem, writing in the year 700, is referring to events of the 530s, 540s BCE, with the Persian conquest of Babylon. That's an excellent question. You're asking how the biblical canon gets shaped ultimately, and that whole process happens below the radar, off the radar screen. We don't have any references to that. All we have are the biblical books emerging, and we could tease out from the books themselves how the books were put together or shaped, but we don't know exactly how. In the end of the day, we don't know by whom, we don't know exactly when, and we don't know exactly how or when they became scripture. That's what I mean by canon, by canonization. All that is said, it happens hidden somewhere. We don't have any evidence on that. as opposed to the Christian Bible. The Christian Bible, those things happen in front of our eyes. There is lots of evidence for that. So I'm up to now 5 main themes of literary prophets. So here, rather than try to give you biographies of each of the prophets that you can easily find in the notes in the JSB, so here Shaye Cohen is trying to digest for you all these prophetic books, especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea and Amos, right? These, right? Then I came up with this list of 5 main themes. And I think it works, but I'll see the Hebrew Bible PhD students agree that these are the right 5 themes. So here they are. I'm not going to read them off because they're right there on the list. I want to start with the first one. Divine exclusivity, monolatry, and monotheism. Or these are terms we have already encountered. So, brief review. We've already seen that there was a clash in ancient Israel between a YHWH alone party or strand and I don't have a good name for the oppositional party. A YHWH isn't always alone party or strand. Namely, the one says, we Israelites are to worship only our God and our God alone. We must not worship any other God. Then we have a group strand, I'm not sure what to call it exactly, and a different theological strand, which says, no, we of course worship YHWH, our national God, but that doesn't mean we can't worship other gods also, especially for the local peoples who are right here. These other gods have claim upon us too. That latter view loses. Right? That latter view is condemned as wrong. That latter view gets to be called idolatry. And we see that already, of course, in the Torah itself. The 10 Commandments as we have it, you shall have no other God before me, not worship other gods, make images, etc. That clearly is written by someone who is an advocate of the YHWH alone perspective. And that is the perspective of the Deuteronomist in the Deuteronomic history, as we've already discussed briefly. Modern Bible scholars are convinced that there is a clear connection between the YHWH alone perspective and the literary prophets. And not just the literary prophets, but going back to the very beginning of literary prophecy, to Hosea. Oh, I skipped the paragraph here distinguishing between monolatry and monotheism. That's probably worth doing for a second. Monolatry, just to remind you, means worship of the one God. Right? The position that we are to worship the one and only God, not necessarily making a statement about the existence or power or effectiveness of other gods. Good example of that would be Deuteronomy 18, which shows you that even things that are prohibited may nonetheless be real. Deuteronomy 18, Israelites are forbidden to engage in necromancy, as I say, consulting the spirits of the dead. They are prohibited to do all kinds of things that we would call magic, but they are real, but they are prohibited. So in a monolatrous perspective, maybe other gods are effective, but they're off limits for me. We worship only one God around here. Other gods, well, the Ammonites can have their God. The Moabites can have their God. The Arameans can have their God, and that's their problem. But those are not my gods, and I am not allowed to go near them. That's what I mean by monolatry. Whereas the other term, monotheism, which is a very difficult term, would be a belief in one God alone. The other term we've used here is cosmic monism, right? The idea that all the goings-on of the cosmos, all the natural order is to be attributed to a single cause. How about those other causes, those other alleged gods? Well, those other alleged gods are just alleged gods. They're either second, third tier gods, mistaken as first tier gods, or they're completely vapor and smoke. Smoke and mirrors. They're just nothing. As I write in my handout, the distinction between the two is clear conceptually, even though not always clear textually. I say you can always argue whether a given verse is monolatrous or a cosmic monist. Anyway, back to where I am. The impetus towards monism, the impetus towards denying the relevance of other gods, and perhaps denying the existence of other gods. The emphasis that we are to worship YHWH alone. That impetus towards this monism, we meaning we modern Bible scholars, are convinced that the literary prophets are part and parcel of that emphasis, part and parcel of that trend. Beginning with Hosea, because Hosea is the one who emphasizes the marriage metaphor, which you've already seen here very briefly, right? Israel, the people of Israel, stand in relationship to God as a wife to a husband. And a wife, of course, needs to be a one-man woman. She needs to be loyal to her husband. If she strays, of course, then she runs the risk of being kicked out of the house. She certainly runs the risk of being punished. That's how Israel is to relate to God. God is the husband. Israel owes exclusive loyalty to God. That's as explicitly worked out in those opening chapters of Hosea. Opening chapters of Hosea. So, when Israel worships other gods, it's akin to engaging in harlotry, fornication, right? Illicit acts, right, which show disloyalty to God. If you have that conception, then indeed we are on our way towards a both certainly monolatry and ultimately towards a monistic view, in which there is one God and one God alone. The great prophet of that is 2nd Isaiah. Here I'm giving you a couple of brief passages where I am the Lord and there is no other, or I am the Lord and there is none else. In 2nd Isaiah, we seem to have progressed not just from monolatry to monism, namely, even Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. Where did Cyrus get his power from? Who gave Cyrus an empire? Was it the Persian gods? No, Persian gods are nothing, because I, the Lord, am the God of both light and dark, good and evil. Those Zoroastrians have a dualistic beliefs, but we don't hold by that. That's not our conception of things, said 2nd Isaiah. We think that the king of Persia is king by virtue of our God, the one and only God, the cosmic God, the only God that matters. Think about the chutzpah of that statement. So this is a great paradox. With this, I stop. Israel's political power diminishes, but the power of Israel's God increases. Okay, with that pregnant statement, we have to stop. Our time is up. I will continue with this on Monday as we pursue our thematic survey of the prophets. So have a great weekend, everyone. Hope to see you Monday.
Okay. Okay. Any initial thoughts?
So much of that was over my head.
Oh, well, I guess I would encourage you maybe to look at the notes and maybe look at it again. It's, but I think it was a good overview of the themes of the prophets.
His ending statement was quite understandable, and I learned. But when he started off, I really was confused for a long time.
So,
Yeah. I like the way he put the time perspective with him, because that's what I was not familiar with, that he put them with the Assyrians first, Amos who there, and then he went into the Babylonians, and then you had the Persians after that, and then you had the Greeks after that. So that's kind of helpful, because it tells you what they're related to, I think.
yeah.
As far as because it's the background of what's happening to the Jewish people.
Right. because really one of the things the prophets have to explain, especially during the exile, is, gee, we're getting kicked around like this, and we got the one and only God. What's going on here?
Yeah. Why is this happening to us? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was punishment taken off by the Babylonians. Supposedly.
Supposedly.
Yes,
And I guess one of the larger questions is Cohen mentions is, and maybe in the next course, is it such a great deal being one of the chosen people?
One of the children. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We seem to have a lot of rules the other guys don't.
Yeah. Why do we have all these rules?
Yeah.
But it was interesting too. So how he was sort of affirming, saying, okay, it's not critical to him that everything written in the book was by that author, but that it's certainly sort of, I guess, thematic of the author, or
Yeah. So.
I can make an observation that has very little to do with everything that he was talking about.
Okay.
Just to lighten it up a little bit. The comment was made, and I think it's made in the text here more than what he said, although it did come out a little bit, that an awful lot of, especially first Isaiah, was thematic and very, in other words, there's identifiable types of writing that everybody says, oh, that's Isaiah. And
Yeah.
that's why the second Isaiah is really second Isaiah instead of whoever else it was, because it was supposed to be the same kind. And a lot of well-known sayings and the text of Handel's Messiah comes out is, it's not only just in 800 BC, but in present time, people are still quoting things that are Isaiah-like.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I have to say, if people are familiar with current movies, the word Navi has been used for aliens that teach earthlings that they're doing bad things. There's a couple of movies where they've been called Navi, and I'm
Oh.
thinking, oh, okay, I now know where that came from.
I didn't know that.
I never heard that. That's interesting.
What movies are these?
Oh God, I'm having a senior moment. Oh God.
Is it the one with all the blue people?
Yes, the blue people. Yes. Why can't I think of the name of the movie?
Avatar.
Yeah, Avatar. Yes, they're
Oh.
avatars.
Oh,
The
Avatar.
Navi people that are real humans, and the humans are horrible and they bash through everything, and then the Navi win in the end, of course.
Oh.
I didn't know any of this.
Oh well, you should see the movie Avatar. It's very good.
I guess now I'll understand something.
Yeah, it's very good. Over and above the plot of you can see the movie just as a science fiction thing,
Yeah.
but you can also, it has a lot of, I think, very prophetic comments and plot. So if you see it, almost like many other fantasies that they say a lot about what's important and theological. It's actually very theological.
Oh, okay.
Sounds like a potential fellowship event.
There you go. Definitely. Good movie too.
So are there multiple movies or just one?
Oh, they're making a second one, but it hasn't come out yet.
Oh,
So
okay.
just Avatar. And it's got to be what, Diane, 5 years old now?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm largely culturally illiterate.
That's funny because that must be why they're playing it. I've always missed it when it was on TV. Like it's either too late in the night or I just taped that. So I'll have to,
Yeah.
so I'll have to
Yeah,
watch.
I got on DVD.
I'll have to watch for that in the movie.
Yeah, and actually, if you want to get into the ecological, because there's a lot of ecological comments made that are very blatant. And there were some researchers that have done an awful lot between how trees and plants communicate, because the whole theme, a lot of it is people communicating with a greater being. And so do the trees, and the trees actually know more than the people do. And there are researchers in the United States that have said, somebody read my research, this is true, and there's scientific papers published about how trees communicate. So, see the science
Through the-
reality, and
Through their roots, they can communicate.
Yeah,
through the roots.
they do through the roots, and, watch the movie.
What do they communicate?
Watch the movie. No, actually, in reality, in the science papers, they communicate nutrients, they communicate damage, and they send out helper roots to their young. These are pine trees in Washington State.
Okay.
Trees
They
are
put-
good.
Yeah, they put radioactive tracers into the mother tree, and it all showed up in her progeny.
Did they get informed consent from the mother tree?
They gently injected her.
I mean, after all, you're making this tree an experimental subject now, that there's all sorts of rules.
No, I think they spoke very softly to the tree as they were sticking needles. Not
And
to
it wasn't
mention
in
the
Tuskegee.
Yeah, the plastic bags that they put over the young ones. But you have to see the movie. The movie is you can see it with a very theological overtone. And for those that think that Shaye is a little bit too deep, see the movie. It's the same thing. It really is a
Okay.
very similar thing. It's just on a different. It's all on an alien planet.
Okay. So, well, next week we'll shift over to Christine Hayes, and then she'll approach the material slightly different. So I think that will help people maybe get a different spin on it. She's a little different in the way she approaches this. At least in terms of her
One other thing I
structure.
liked that he did here was that he focused on the, because they don't always think of it this way. You think prophets is foretelling the future, but he really says, hey, they're opponents.
Yeah.
Of the society, basically, and the kings, not fortune tellers.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we think in that way,
They're countercultural, which I think is probably, at least for Christians, something we would identify with Jesus as being, and John the Baptist
Yeah.
as being as countercultural.
Yeah, and so it's good to think of them that way when you're reading them, and how they related to the societies that were around them, like the Persians, the Assyrians.
And they had that. Well, and then I think he made the point they had different interests because, like Amos is really well known for his social commentary, and other ones are interested in other stuff. Isaiah is actually one of the reasons you can see differences. Is Isaiah on the one hand, at first Isaiah there's foretelling, whereas in the subsequent parts, like the part I read tonight, second Isaiah, that's an effort to bring comfort to the exiled people. So it's really a different tone, and try and persuade them that the one true God is still going to look out for you. So.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna leave the meeting. Enjoy.
Okay.
Have a happy Easter, everyone.
Okay, well, we will see you all next week.
Yes. Happy Easter, one and all. Good night.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
You too.
Mitch.
Thanks, Don. Good night.
Good.
Night.
Night.